Little girl?
Preston Whitmore's lips curled into a scornful smile. He scrutinized the girl from head to toe, as if something were stuck to her shoes.
Is this the person they sent? A tiny little black girl wearing her father's shoes?
He turned to the crowd.
What's next? Is she gonna pull crayons out of that bag?
Laughter erupted throughout the room. Imani's voice remained calm.
I will defend my father.
Preston stepped closer.
Go home, girl, before you further embarrass yourself and your father.
The 16-year-old girl didn't move, didn't blink.
I will defend my father.
She opened her briefcase. What would emerge from that worn leather briefcase would expose Preston Whitmore's case, shatter 6 families, and silence him in the very eyes of those who had just mocked him. But before we get to that courtroom, you need to understand where Imani Davis came from, because nobody becomes that fearless overnight. 3 days earlier, Maplewood Avenue, south side of the city. If you've never been there, picture this: a street where the sidewalks crack, but the porches are always swept clean. A laundromat on the corner that never closes, and above it, a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls, a leaky faucet, and more love inside than most mansions will ever know. That's where Imani lived, with her father, Calvin Davis. Calvin was 42 years old, quiet hands, gentle voice. The kind of man who said yes, sir, and no, ma'am, even to people who never deserved his respect. He worked as a custodian at Glenfield Tower downtown, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, fixing things nobody else wanted to fix. Some nights he pulled double shifts. Some mornings he came home so tired his hands shook when he poured his coffee. But every single night, no matter how late, Calvin cooked dinner for his daughter. Every single night. Because that's what he promised Denise he would do. Denise was Imani's mother. She died 4 years ago, cancer that moved faster than any doctor could chase. But before she got sick, Denise Davis had been 6 credits away from finishing her paralegal degree. Her textbooks were still on the shelf in Imani's room. Her graduation photo, cap and gown, the biggest smile you ever saw, still hung on the living room wall. Imani started reading those textbooks when she was 11. Not for school, not for fun. She read them the way some kids memorize sports stats, obsessively, hungrily, like the words might disappear if she didn't learn them fast enough. That Tuesday evening, Calvin came home from his shift and found Imani at the kitchen table, buried in a stack of highlighted printouts. He set down a grocery bag and smiled. "Baby girl, you studying for school or trying to pass the bar?" Imani didn't look up. Did you know that in Henderson versus Palmer, 1994, a tenant proved retaliatory eviction just by showing a pattern of complaints filed before the notice was served? Calvin shook his head. Your mama would have loved this. Remember that case name, Henderson versus Palmer. It's going to come back. And when it does, it will change everything. The next morning, 6:45 a.m., a knock hit the front door so hard the hinges rattled. Calvin opened it. Douglas Pennington stood in the hallway, property manager for Glenfield Property Holdings. Starched shirt, clipboard, zero eye contact. He handed Calvin a folded document without saying good morning. Eviction notice. 5 days to vacate. The reason listed? Willful property damage to the basement storage area. Estimated cost of repairs? $8,500. Calvin's face went blank. I've been here 14 years, never missed rent. You know I didn't do this. Pennington didn't blink. The damage report says otherwise, Mr. Davis. 5 days. He turned and walked away. Imani was standing in the hallway behind her father. She didn't say a word, but her hand closed slowly around the doorframe until her knuckles went white. And while Calvin was staring at a piece of paper that could take away the only home his daughter had ever known, let me tell you what was happening on the other side of town. Downtown, 42nd floor, the offices of Whitmore and Associates, one of the most powerful law firms in the county. Glass walls, Italian leather chairs, a view that reminded you every second who owned this city and who didn't. Preston Whitmore III sat in his corner office, flipping through the Davis eviction file like it was junk mail. He represented Glenfield Property Holdings. He'd handled cases like this before, cases against people like Calvin. His associate asked how long the hearing would take. Preston didn't even look up. 15 minutes. These people never fight back. He tossed the file on his desk. And when they do, they lose. File the motion. Let's get this done before lunch. These people, remember that phrase, because Preston Whitmore had spent his entire career looking down at people like Calvin Davis. He had never, not once, considered the possibility that one of these people might look back up and see straight through him. The next morning, Calvin and Imani took 2 buses to the county legal aid office on the east side. If you've never been inside a legal aid office, imagine a waiting room where hope goes to sit down and slowly die. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights that buzz just loud enough to remind you nobody's coming to fix them, a water cooler in the corner with no cups, and a line of people, long, tired, silent, each one holding a folder full of problems, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them what to do next. Calvin signed in at the front desk. The receptionist didn't look up. She just pointed at 2 empty chairs in the back row and said, "Someone will call your name." They waited 2 hours. Their assigned attorney was a man named Raymond Stokes, late 30s, tired eyes, coffee stains on his sleeve, and a desk buried under case files so deep you couldn't see the wood underneath. Raymond Stokes was not a bad man. He was not a lazy man. He was a man trying to carry 93 open cases on 2 shoulders, and those shoulders were breaking. You could see it in the way he sat, leaned forward, like the weight on his back wouldn't let him straighten up anymore. Stokes reviewed Calvin's file in under 10 minutes. He flipped through the eviction notice, the damage report, the photographs Pennington had submitted, close-up shots of cracked concrete and broken pipes. He looked at the signed affidavit. He looked at the repair estimate. Then he rubbed his eyes, set the folder down, and exhaled like a man about to deliver news he wished he didn't have to. "Mr. Davis, I'll be honest with you. This is going to be difficult. They've got photographs. They've got a signed affidavit from the property manager. They've got a repair estimate totaling $8,500. Without counter evidence, something that directly contradicts their documentation, this is an uphill battle. These property companies have resources we just don't have." Calvin sat very still. His hands were folded in his lap, the way a man holds himself when he's trying not to fall apart in public. "So, what do we do?" Stokes looked at him the way a doctor looks at a patient when the prognosis isn't good. "We show up, we tell the truth, and we hope the judge listens." Hope. That was the entire legal strategy. Hope. Imani sat in the chair next to her father, staring at a crack in the tile floor. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say a single word until they were outside, standing in the parking lot under the afternoon sun, the heat pressing down on them like a hand pushing them into the ground. Then she said it, quietly, almost to herself. Hope isn't a legal strategy. Back on Maplewood Avenue, the news traveled the way bad news always does in neighborhoods like this. Fast, quiet, and with a shrug at the end. Calvin Davis is getting evicted. Did you hear? Such a shame. Good man. But what are you going to do? The woman at the corner store shook her head. Same thing happened to the Turners last year. Same building company. You can't fight those people, Calvin. The man who ran the laundromat downstairs leaned against the doorframe. 14 years you've been here and they just throw you out? That's cold, brother. But I've seen it before. Nobody was shocked. Nobody picked up a phone or wrote a letter. They just shook their heads and went back to their lives. Because in neighborhoods like Maplewood Avenue, eviction wasn't a tragedy. It was Tuesday. That was the worst part. Nobody was even surprised. But there was one person on Maplewood Avenue who had something more than sympathy. Brenda Collins lived across the hall. 74 years old, bad knees, a strong grip, and a pair of eyes that didn't miss a single thing that happened in that building. She caught Imani in the stairwell that evening, grabbed her wrist with fingers like iron, and pulled her close. "Baby, come here. I need to tell you something, and you need to listen." Imani leaned in. "I saw them," Brenda whispered. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were sharp. "The property people. 2 men in work jackets. They went down to that basement, carrying a sledgehammer and a pry bar. This was March 10th, 2 days before they said your daddy broke anything. 2 full days before that damage report. I heard banging for 20 minutes straight. And when those men came back up, they were laughing, Imani. Laughing like they just finished a job." Imani's pulse was hammering. "Ms. Collins, would you say that in court? Under oath?" The courage drained from Brenda's face, the way color leaves a sunset. Slowly, then all at once. She let go of Imani's wrist and stepped back. "Baby, I want to help. Lord knows I do. But I'm 74 years old. I live in this building too. Same landlord, same company. If they find out I talked, they'll do to me what they're doing to your father. And I've got nowhere else to go." "Ms. Collins, what if I could protect your tenancy in court?" Brenda looked at her for a long time. Then she shook her head. "You're the smartest child I've ever known, Imani. But you're still a child. You can't protect me from people like that." She stepped inside. The deadbolt clicked, then the chain, then silence. Imani stood alone in the stairwell, one hand still raised where the door used to be open. The dryers hummed below. The hallway light flickered. And she realized something that made her stomach drop. She had a witness. She had the truth. And none of it mattered. Because everyone who could help was too terrified to speak. That night, something broke inside Calvin Davis. Past midnight. Imani had gone to bed, or so he thought. Calvin sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark. The apartment was silent except for the dryers and the ticking of the clock Denise picked out at a yard sale 8 years ago. He was holding her photograph. Not the graduation one on the wall, the small one from his wallet, creased at the corners. Denise at a summer picnic, head thrown back, laughing, sunlight in her hair. He started talking to her, the way he sometimes did when the world got too heavy and there was nobody left to carry it with him. "I tried, Denise." His voice broke on her name. "I tried to give her a home, a life where she didn't have to wonder if the ground was about to disappear. But I can't fight these people. I don't have the money. I don't have the lawyers. I'm just a janitor. I'm just a janitor who loved you and loves our girl, and that's all I've ever had." The clock ticked, the dryers hummed, and for the first time in 14 years, Calvin Davis seriously considered packing 2 suitcases and walking away from the only home his daughter had ever known. Not because he was guilty, not because he was a coward, but because the world had spent his entire life teaching him one lesson, that men who look like him do not win fights like this. And tonight, holding that photograph, he believed it. Imani wasn't asleep. She was lying in bed with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to every word her father said through the thin wall between their rooms. She heard him say Denise. She heard his voice crack. She heard the long silence after, The kind of silence that's heavier than crying, because it means a person has run out of words and tears at the same time. She lay there for a long time. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was locked tight. Something was shifting inside her. Something deeper than sadness, harder than grief. It started in her chest and spread outward like heat from a fire that refused to go out. She got up, bare feet on cold floor, walked down the hallway without making a sound, and stopped just outside the kitchen. Through the gap in the doorway, she could see her father, hunched over the table, pressing a photograph against his chest, like it was the last thing keeping him alive. She whispered it so quietly, even she barely heard it. "You're not just a janitor, Daddy. And I'm not just a kid." She didn't go into the kitchen. She didn't wake him. She turned around, walked back to her room, sat down on the edge of her bed, and pulled her mother's paralegal textbook off the shelf. The spine was cracked. The pages were yellow. Denise Davis had highlighted whole paragraphs in green and pink, and in the margins, in her neat handwriting, she'd written notes to herself. "Remember this for the exam. Look up the statute. This is important." Imani opened the book to chapter 14, Tenant Rights and Retaliatory Eviction, and she began to work. What happened over the next 48 hours was not magic. It was not a miracle. It was a 16-year-old girl refusing to accept the ending that the world had already written for her family. Day 1. The public library on Franklin Street, 2nd floor, reference section. Imani sat at a computer terminal for 6 hours straight. She pulled up archived property records for Glenfield Property Holdings, every eviction filing, every tenant complaint, every damage report submitted in the last 5 years. She printed everything. She organized everything. And then she found it. A pattern. 6 evictions in 3 years. 6 tenants. All of them black. All of them in buildings managed by Douglas Pennington. And in every single case, every single one, the eviction notice came within 30 days of the tenant filing a formal maintenance complaint. Tenant complains about broken plumbing. 30 days later, damage report, eviction notice, gone. Tenant complains about mold. 30 days later, damage report, eviction notice, gone. 6 times, same sequence, same property manager, same signature on the bottom of every damage report. Imani sat back in her chair and stared at the screen. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury. She cross-referenced Calvin's timeline. February 18th, Calvin filed a formal complaint about a broken heating unit in apartment 4A. March 12th, Pennington's damage report appeared. 22 days apart. The pattern held. Her father was case number 7 in a system designed to silence tenants who dared to ask for what they were owed. Day 2. Imani sat at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook and wrote a legal brief by hand. 14 pages. She cited case law from memory, statutes she'd memorized from her mother's textbooks, precedents she'd found in the library, tenant protection codes she could recite the way other teenagers recite song lyrics. Her handwriting was small and precise. She didn't cross out a single word. That afternoon, she went back to Brenda Collins. She knocked softly. Brenda opened the door 2 inches, chain still on. "Ms. Collins, I found something. It's not just my father. There are 6 other families. Same company, same manager, same trick. Every time a tenant complains, they fabricate damage and file eviction. It's a pattern. And if you testify, you won't be alone. You'll be one voice in a pattern so clear that no judge can ignore it." Brenda's eyes narrowed behind the chain. "And if I testify and we lose, then what happens to me?" "If we lose, I'll make sure the record shows you were a witness under protection of the court. Retaliation against a witness is a separate offense. They touch you, they face a second case they can't win. Brenda stared at her for 10 long seconds. Then she unchained the door. "Your mama raised something special," she said quietly. "Tell me what you need me to write." That evening, Imani ironed her thrift store blazer on the kitchen table. She polished her father's dress shoes, the ones she'd be borrowing tomorrow. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced her opening statement. Her voice was steady. Her arguments were clean. She rehearsed cross-examination questions until she could deliver them without looking at her notes. Calvin watched from the hallway. He didn't understand everything she was doing, but he understood enough to know his daughter had turned their kitchen into a war room, and she had no intention of losing. The morning of the hearing, Calvin put on his one good suit, navy blue, slightly too loose in the shoulders. Imani wore the blazer, the borrowed shoes, and carried the leather satchel. Inside it, 6 case summaries, a handwritten legal brief, Brenda Collins' sworn written statement, a pocket constitution, and the photograph of her mother. They arrived at the courthouse at 8:15 a.m. The hearing was at 9:30. Raymond Stokes was supposed to meet them at 8:30 on the front steps. 8:30 came. No Stokes. 8:45. Nothing. 9 o'clock. Calvin called his office. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. At 9:08, a text message arrived. Emergency with another case. Filed continuance request. So sorry, Mr. Davis. Calvin's hands were trembling when he showed Imani the screen. She read it twice. Then she walked to the clerk's window and asked one question. Was a continuance granted for Davis, case number 2026-HC-0312? The clerk typed for a moment. Denied. Hearing proceeds as scheduled. 9:30, courtroom 4B. Calvin's face emptied. He looked at his daughter and said the words of a man who had just run out of road. "Baby, let's just go home." "No." "Imani, no, Daddy. I'll do it. I'll defend you." Calvin stared at her. "You're 16 years old. I know every case in this file. I know the law better than Stokes did. I know what Pennington did, and I know how to prove it." She gripped the satchel strap with both hands. "Let me try. Please." The courthouse hallway echoed around them. Somewhere a door slammed. A phone rang. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless, indifferent hum. Calvin looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. The blazer that was still a little too big. The shoes that were still a little too wide. And the eyes. Denise's eyes. The same fire. The same refusal to be told no. He nodded. Once. Slowly. Imani turned and pushed open the heavy wooden door of courtroom 4B. The satchel hung from her shoulder. The photograph of her mother pressed against the case files inside. On the other side of that door, Preston Whitmore was already seated, relaxed, smiling, checking his watch. He had no idea what was about to walk through that door. But before we walk into that courtroom with Imani, I need to take you back to the night before, back to the library, back to the moment everything changed. It was 9:46 p.m. The Franklin Street Public Library was 15 minutes from closing. The reference section was empty, except for Imani, a flickering desk lamp, and 6 printouts spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle that nobody had ever tried to solve. 6 eviction cases, 6 families, 6 damage reports, all signed by Douglas Pennington, all filed against tenants of color. She had stared at those printouts for hours. She had read every filing date, every complaint number, every damage description. And something kept pulling at her, a thread she could feel but couldn't see, like a word stuck on the tip of your tongue. It was right there, right there. Then she saw it. She pulled the first case, The Robinson family, apartment 2C, Glenfield Towers, filed a maintenance complaint about water damage on January 5th. Pennington's damage report appeared on February 1st, 26 days later. Eviction filed the same week. Second case, the Washington family, apartment 6A. Maintenance complaint about broken windows, March 14th. Damage report, April 9th, 26 days. Eviction filed. Third case, fourth case, fifth case. The gap varied, 22 days, 28 days, 30 days, but the sequence never changed. Complaint, damage report, eviction. Complaint, damage report, eviction. Like clockwork. Like a machine designed to do one thing: punish tenants who dared to ask for repairs they were legally owed. Imani pulled up her father's records. February 18th. Calvin filed a formal complaint about the broken heater. March 12th. Pennington filed the damage report. 22 days. Her hands were trembling when she whispered it. Every single time. Complaint, then damage, then eviction. Same man, same signature, same trick. They've been running this for years, and nobody caught it. Nobody caught it, because nobody was looking. Because the families they targeted didn't have lawyers who cared enough to dig. Because legal aid attorneys like Raymond Stokes had 93 cases on their desks and 10 minutes per file, and no time to cross-reference patterns across years of records. But a 16-year-old girl with her dead mother's textbooks and a public library card, she had time. She had fury. And she had something else none of those lawyers ever had. She had a reason to look. Imani reached for her notebook and flipped to a page she had bookmarked weeks ago. Henderson versus Palmer, 1994. The case she'd quoted to her father over dinner like it was nothing. The case Calvin had smiled at and shaken his head. The case that established, in clear and binding language, that a pattern of retaliatory action following tenant complaints constitutes prima facie evidence of retaliatory eviction, and shifts the burden of proof to the landlord. 6 families, one pattern, one precedent. She had the weapon. But she still needed one more thing. She needed Pennington's original damage report entered into the court record, with the date stamp visible. She needed the judge to see the timeline with her own eyes. Calvin's maintenance complaint on February 18th. Pennington's damage report on March 12th. 22 days. And then the same gap repeated 6 times, exposed side by side. And she needed Brenda Collins to stand up, raise her right hand, and tell that courtroom what she saw in the basement on March 10th. The sledgehammer, the pry bar, the laughter. The librarian announced closing time. Imani gathered her printouts, slid them into the leather satchel, and walked out into the night air. She had everything she needed. Almost. The rest would have to happen inside that courtroom, in real time, in front of Preston Whitmore, Judge Caldwell, and everyone who had already decided she didn't belong there. No safety net, no second chance. One shot. Courtroom 4B smelled like old wood and floor wax, high ceilings, an American flag in the corner. Judge Eleanor Caldwell sat behind the bench, silver-haired, reading glasses low on her nose, the kind of face that had seen every lie a courtroom could produce and had stopped being impressed 20 years ago. Preston Whitmore was already seated at the petitioner's table, legs crossed, pen tapping lightly on a leather folder. Beside him, Douglas Pennington sat, with his hands clasped, chin lifted, looking like a man who had already won and was just waiting for the paperwork. Then the door opened. Calvin walked in first. Imani walked in behind him. They crossed the courtroom in silence and sat down at the respondent's table. No lawyer, no briefcase, just a man in a navy suit and a girl with a leather satchel. Judge Caldwell looked up from her file. Her eyes moved from Calvin to Imani, then to the empty chair where an attorney should have been sitting. "Mr. Davis, where is your legal representation?" Calvin started to stand. "Your Honor, our attorney had an emergency." Imani was already on her feet. "Your Honor, I'd like to request permission to represent my father as a lay advocate under State Civil Procedure Rule permitting non-attorney representation in housing court administrative hearings." The courtroom went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind where the air itself holds still because it doesn't know what's about to happen. Preston's pen stopped tapping. He looked at Imani the way you look at a fly that just landed on your dinner plate. Then he laughed. Not a subtle laugh, a full, open, deliberate laugh designed to make sure everyone in the room heard it. "Your Honor, this is absurd." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "She's a child. I have 31 years of litigation experience. She has a book bag. Are we seriously going to let a teenager play lawyer because her father couldn't afford a real one?" Imani didn't move, didn't blink. Judge Caldwell held up one hand. The room went silent again. She studied Imani over the top of her glasses for a long moment. The blazer, the shoes, the satchel, the steady eyes that didn't look away. She cited the correct procedural rule, Counselor, which is more than some attorneys manage on their first day. She turned to Imani. "I'll allow it. Provisionally. Miss Davis, you will conduct yourself with the same standards as any officer of this court. If at any point I determine you are unprepared or disruptive, I will revoke this permission. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." Preston exhaled through his nose and sat back down. He leaned toward Pennington and said, not quite quietly enough, "This won't take long." He was right about that, just not in the way he meant. Preston opened his case like a man hanging a picture he'd already framed. Smooth, practiced, every word measured, every pause calculated. He presented the damage photographs, 8x10 glossy prints of cracked concrete, broken pipes, water stains on the basement floor. He presented the repair estimate, $8,500 from a licensed contractor. He presented Pennington's signed affidavit describing the damage discovered on March 12th and attributing it to the tenant in apartment 4A. He never once said Calvin's name. It was always the tenant, like a man wasn't worth naming. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor. The tenant caused significant structural damage to the property. The building owner has exercised its contractual right to terminate the lease. This is not complicated. This is not ambiguous. This is a straightforward case of property destruction and its consequences." He sat down, folded his hands, looked at Imani the way a cat looks at a mouse it hasn't decided to kill yet. Judge Caldwell nodded. "Miss Davis, your cross-examination." Imani stood. She picked up a single sheet of paper from the satchel and walked to the center of the courtroom. Her voice was calm, lower than you'd expect from a 16-year-old, steady like a heartbeat. She addressed Pennington directly. "Mr. Pennington, you signed the damage report for the basement storage area. Is that correct?" Pennington barely looked at her. "That's correct." "And you personally inspected the damage?" "I did." "On what date?" "March 12th. "And on what date did my father, Calvin Davis, the man sitting right there, file a formal maintenance complaint about the broken heating unit in apartment 4A? Pennington shifted. His eyes darted toward Preston. "I'd have to check the records on that." Imani held up the sheet of paper. "I have the records right here, Mr. Pennington. The complaint was filed on February 18th, 22 days before your damage report. The complaint was submitted through Glenfield's own online maintenance portal. It has a timestamp, a confirmation number, and your name listed as the receiving property manager." She let the silence do its work. Can you explain why a tenant who had just filed a complaint about a broken heater suddenly caused $8,500 in basement damage 22 days later? Pennington's jaw tightened. Coincidence. The two things are unrelated. Coincidence, Imani repeated. She let the words sit in the air like smoke. Preston stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is implying a connection that doesn't exist. The timeline is coincidental and irrelevant to the property damage claim. Judge Caldwell looked at Imani. Miss Davis, where are you going with this? Your Honor, I intend to demonstrate that this timeline is not a coincidence. It is a pattern, and I have documentation to support that claim. Caldwell paused, studied her, then nodded slowly. You may continue, but get to the point, Miss Davis. This court's time is not unlimited. Yes, Your Honor. Imani walked back to the respondent's table. She sat down. She didn't present the pattern. Not yet. She knew, instinctively, the way her mother might have known, that the strongest evidence is the evidence you make them wait for. She had planted the seed. 22 days. A complaint before the damage, a timestamp with Pennington's name on it. Let it sit. Let it grow. Let them wonder. Preston leaned back in his chair. His face was still composed, but something behind his eyes had changed. A flicker. Not fear, not yet, but attention. For the first time since Imani had walked into this courtroom, Preston Whitmore was paying attention. And that was exactly where she wanted him. Judge Caldwell tapped her gavel once. 15-minute recess. I want to review the submitted documentation. The courtroom exhaled. Calvin and Imani stepped into the hallway. The heavy door swung shut behind them, and the noise of the courthouse rushed in. Footsteps, distant phones, the hum of fluorescent lights that never stopped. Calvin looked at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time. Where did you learn all that? The rules, the dates, the way you talked to him. Imani unzipped the satchel and pulled out the photograph. Denise, in her graduation cap, smiling like the future was something she couldn't wait to meet. Mom's books. I've been reading them since I was 11. Every note she wrote in those margins, every case she highlighted. She paused. She never got to finish, Daddy. But she taught me anyway. Calvin's lips pressed together until they went white. He pulled his daughter into his arms and held her. The man who hadn't cried in front of Imani since the funeral was standing in a courthouse hallway with tears running down his face. They didn't see Preston Whitmore watching from 20 feet away. He waited until Imani walked toward the water fountain. Then he moved, stood too close to Calvin, close enough that the cologne hit like a wall, expensive, sharp, suffocating. Mr. Davis, let me make this simple. His voice dropped low, a voice made for hallways when no one was listening. Take the settlement. 3 months to relocate, no legal fees, walk away clean. Calvin wiped his face, said nothing. Because if your daughter keeps playing this game, I will file a formal complaint for unauthorized practice of law. She's a minor, Mr. Davis. What she's doing in there is a prosecutable offense. Preston let that land. She'll have a record before she graduates. Is that what you want? You want to sacrifice your child's future for an apartment above a laundromat? Calvin's stomach dropped. The hallway buzzed. His heartbeat climbed into his throat. Then something steadied inside him. Something that felt like Denise's hand on his back. My daughter is smarter than anyone in that courtroom, including you. Threaten her again, and you'll find out how much a janitor is willing to fight for his child. Preston's smirk hardened. We'll see. He turned and walked away. His shoes clicked on the tile like a countdown. Calvin stood alone, shaking. Not from fear, from the effort of holding himself together. But a new terror had entered his mind. What if Preston was right? What if winning this case cost Imani everything? Down the hall, Imani was in the courthouse bathroom, alone, door locked, both hands gripping the sink until her knuckles ached. She stared at her reflection. Thrift store blazer, borrowed shoes, a building that was never built for people who looked like her. The light flickered, and for 1 second she looked older, tired, afraid, because she was afraid. She had built this argument like a house of cards. One wrong question, one sustained objection, one hesitation, and everything crashes. Not just for Calvin, for Brenda, for the Robinsons, for every family Glenfield had ever destroyed. She pulled out the photograph, held it with both hands. "I don't know if I can do this, Mama," her voice cracked. "But I heard Daddy last night. I heard him say he was just a janitor, and I can't let him believe that." She put the photo back, straightened the blazer, wiped her eyes, looked at herself one more time, not at the girl she was, but at who she was about to become. She unlocked the door and walked out. Calvin was standing by the courtroom entrance. When he saw her coming, a war crossed his face. The instinct to protect her against the realization that she was already past the point of protecting. He opened his mouth, maybe to tell her about Preston's threat, maybe to say, "Let's go home." Imani spoke first. "Let's finish this." She pushed open the door. The courtroom was different now. Word had spread, through clerks, bailiffs, whispered conversations by the vending machines. A 16-year-old girl, no lawyer, going up against Preston Whitmore. By the time recess ended, the gallery had doubled. Court staff lingered by the back wall. 2 attorneys from neighboring courtrooms stood in the doorway, watching. Judge Caldwell returned to the bench. "Miss Davis, you may continue." Imani stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a rebuttal witness, Ms. Brenda Collins." Preston shot up. "Objection! No prior notice of this witness." "Your Honor, Ms. Collins was a last-minute addition due to the absence of our counsel. I was unable to file disclosure without an attorney. I'm requesting the court's discretion to allow rebuttal testimony." Caldwell looked at Preston, looked at Imani. "I'll allow it. Proceed." Brenda Collins walked to the stand like a woman walking into a storm she'd been running from her whole life. Her hands trembled taking the oath. But when she sat down and locked eyes with Imani, something passed between them. A promise made in a stairwell, now being kept. "Ms. Collins, can you tell the court what you saw on March 10th of this year?" Brenda gripped the armrest, took one breath. "I saw 2 men in Glenfield work jackets go down to the basement. They were carrying a sledgehammer and a pry bar. Around 10 in the morning, I heard banging for 20 minutes, concrete breaking." Her voice steadied. "When they came back up, they were laughing like they'd just finished a job." A murmur moved through the gallery. Pennington's face drained of color. "And when was the damage officially reported?" "March 12th, 2 days later." Preston stood for cross-examination. Went after Brenda hard. Her eyesight, her memory, her distance from the basement door. She didn't flinch. 19 years in that building had turned her memory into concrete. Calm, precise, unmovable. He sat down with nothing. Judge Caldwell turned to Imani. "Additional evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Imani reached into the satchel, pulled out 6 printed summaries and laid them on the table, one by one, slowly. The sound of paper on wood was the only noise in the room. "Your Honor, in 3 years, Glenfield Property Holdings filed 6 eviction cases. In every one, the tenant had filed a maintenance complaint first. In every one, a damage report appeared within 30 days, signed by Douglas Pennington. In every one, the tenant was evicted." She looked directly at Pennington. Every tenant was black. The gallery erupted. Caldwell raised one hand. Silence. My father filed a complaint on February 18th. The damage report appeared March 12th. 22 days. Same pattern, same manager, same signature. He is not a unique case, Your Honor. He is the latest target in a system designed to punish tenants who ask for what they're legally owed. Preston was on his feet. Objection! Speculation! These cases are unrelated. She is a child drawing imaginary— Your Honor. Imani's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Henderson versus Palmer, 1994. A documented pattern of adverse action following tenant complaints constitutes prima facie evidence of retaliatory eviction. The burden shifts to the landlord. She turned to Preston. 6 tenants, 6 complaints, 6 damage reports, 6 evictions, all black families, all signed by the same man. If that's not a pattern, counselor, what would you call it? Preston opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Caldwell watched him for 5 seconds. She's correct. Henderson versus Palmer is binding precedent. Overruled. Preston sank into his chair. The smirk that had lived on his face since Imani first walked into this courtroom was gone. Completely gone. Imani wasn't finished. Your Honor, I request permission to re-examine Mr. Pennington. Caldwell nodded. Pennington was sweating. Imani didn't raise her voice. Every question landed like a nail driven flush into wood. Mr. Pennington, did you prepare all 6 damage reports? Yes. In each case, the tenant filed a complaint within 30 days? I don't recall the exact. January 5th, complaint. February 1st, your report. March 14th, complaint. April 9th, your report. Shall I continue? Those are coincidences. 6 coincidences. 6 black families, all evicted, all profitable for your employer. She held up Brenda's statement. And an eyewitness saw your workers destroying the basement with a sledgehammer 2 days before you claimed to discover the damage. One step closer. Did Glenfield instruct you to fabricate damage reports to remove tenants who filed complaints? No, I didn't. Then why does every case follow the same sequence? Why is your signature on every report? And why were your employees laughing when they came up from that basement? Pennington looked at Preston. Desperate, drowning, reaching for a lifeline that wasn't coming. Preston stared at the table, because there was nothing left to say. Judge Caldwell removed her glasses, set them on the bench, folded her hands. I've heard sufficient testimony and reviewed the evidence. The respondent has demonstrated a clear, documented pattern of retaliatory eviction practices by Glenfield Property Holdings. The testimony of Ms. Collins, combined with the timeline evidence across 6 prior cases, raises serious concerns about the integrity of the damage report submitted in this matter. She turned to Preston. Counselor, your client had every opportunity to provide a legitimate, non-retaliatory explanation. You did not. Preston said nothing. His hands lay flat on the leather folder like a man bracing for impact. I am dismissing the eviction petition against Mr. Calvin Davis effective immediately. Mr. Davis will retain full tenancy with no outstanding obligations related to this claim. Calvin's hand found Imani's under the table. He squeezed until his knuckles went white. Judge Caldwell wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring Glenfield Property Holdings and Mr. Douglas Pennington to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential fraud, evidence fabrication, and discriminatory housing practices. The pattern presented today demands a full and thorough investigation. Pennington's face collapsed. all at once, like a building whose foundation just gave way. He looked at Preston for help. Preston wouldn't look at him. Preston was staring straight ahead at nothing, the way a man stares when the ground he stood on his entire career cracks beneath his feet. Caldwell turned to Imani. The sternness softened, just enough to let something human come through. Miss Davis, in 30 years on this bench, I have seen thousands of attorneys present arguments in this courtroom. I want you to hear me when I say this. What you did today was more prepared, more precise, and more courageous than 90% of what I have seen from licensed professionals. You should be extraordinarily proud. The gallery broke. Not applause, something quieter. A ripple of emotion moving through the room like a wave. A clerk wiped her eyes. The bailiff nodded once. The two attorneys in the doorway looked at each other and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Calvin stood. His legs were shaking. He wrapped his arms around Imani and held her the way you hold someone when you've been drowning and they just pulled you to shore. His shoulders shook. 14 years of double shifts, quiet endurance and swallowed pride, all breaking loose at once. Imani held him back, eyes closed, fingers gripping the fabric of his navy suit. The satchel hung from her shoulder, lighter now than it had ever been. In the third row, Brenda Collins clutched her purse to her chest, tears streaming, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus," over and over, to no one and everyone. The courtroom emptied slowly. One woman, a stranger, touched Calvin's arm and said, "God bless your daughter." Preston Whitmore was the last to leave. He gathered his files, closed his briefcase with a click that echoed in the empty room, walked toward the door, and stopped. Imani was standing in the aisle, the satchel on her shoulder, her father beside her. Preston looked at her. The arrogance was gone. The condescension was gone. What remained was something he probably hadn't felt in 31 years of practicing law. He studied her, this girl in a thrift store blazer who had just dismantled his case with a leather bag and her dead mother's textbooks. "Who taught you?" Imani didn't hesitate. "My mother." Preston held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Once. Not an apology, not a surrender, something harder for a man like him to give. Recognition. The involuntary acknowledgement that he had been beaten, fairly, by someone he had dismissed as nothing. He walked out. His footsteps faded down the hallway into silence. Calvin put his arm around his daughter. They walked out of the courthouse into late afternoon light. Golden, warm, the kind that makes ordinary streets look like they're glowing. Maplewood Avenue was 30 minutes by bus, but today they walked. No rush, no deadline, no eviction. "Your mama would have been the best lawyer in this city," Calvin said quietly. Imani looked up at him. She still might be. In the weeks that followed, the ripples spread. The district attorney opened an investigation into Glenfield Property Holdings. Pennington was suspended. 3 evicted families were contacted about reinstatement. Preston Whitmore quietly withdrew as Glenfield's counsel. No statement, just a name removed from a client list and a silence that said everything. Raymond Stokes called Calvin to apologize, then asked if Imani had considered interning at Legal Aid. Calvin laughed for the first time in weeks. One afternoon, a handwritten letter arrived, court stationery, from Judge Caldwell. "The law needs people like you. Enclosed is a pre-law scholarship. I encourage you to apply. You've already proven you belong." Calvin framed it next to Denise's graduation photograph. 2 frames, side by side. A mother who never finished, and a daughter just getting started. This story is about truth being louder than power, preparation sharper than arrogance, and love, the kind a mother leaves in her books and a father carries in his wallet, being stronger than any system designed to break it. That night, Imani sat at the kitchen table, the same table where her father nearly gave up, with a new book open. An LSAT prep guide. The satchel hung on the chair. Denise watched from the wall. And Imani looked up, almost as if she could see you, and smiled. If this story moved you, hit like. Share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe, because every week we tell stories about people who were told they were nothing and proved they were everything. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody expected.
Yo, a 16-year-old girl, no lawyer, no degree, just a bag full of her dead mama's textbooks, and she posed what 6 attorneys before her never even saw. And I'm not gonna lie, this one hit different, because I kept thinking about myself. How many times I have been in this situation where I knew what to do, but I just sat there, waiting for somebody smarter, somebody with a title. And this girl, she's 16, no lawyer, no backup plan. She just said, I will do it, that's it. She worked in and did what crime professionals couldn't. And the crazy part, she didn't beat Preston Whitmore because she was smarter. She beat him because she actually did the work. He thought out thinking is gonna be easy. She thought out like her whole life depended on it, because it did. It wasn't talent, it wasn't money. She just cared more, simple as that. But the part that broke me was Calvin, sitting in the dark kitchen until midnight, holding his wife's picture, saying, I am just a janitor. How many of us have been there, sitting somewhere alone, believing the worst thing somebody ever said about us? So, I gotta ask you, who in your life is in the dark kitchen right now, who needs somebody to tell him, nah, you're way more than that? Leave your thoughts in the comments, or just drop a heart. And share this with someone fighting something nobody else can see, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody expects.